Hey everyone! Today we are talking about one of the most famous video game company, the creator behind world successful games like Crash, The Last of Us and Uncharted. But do you know how it all started? Like almost every company, they've started from scratch, and with some good skills and brilliant ideas, Naughty Dog became one of the biggest studios in the gaming industry. This is the history of Naughty Dog. It all started back in 1984. Formerly called Jam Software, it was founded by high school students Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin. As they already had some bases on Lisp and C++, they've teamed up to create software for the Apple II to create the first game. They decided for a skiing game, but Gavin accidentally copied bootleg games over the only copy of the skiing game they had. They could very well be done in the first error, but then Rubin decided to create another skiing game called Ski Crazed in only one weekend.
And I had gone on a ski trip and decided to make a skiing simulator, which utterly failed to recreate skiing, but was actually a pretty fun game.
The goal was to get to the lodge at the bottom and meet up with the babes.
I was a very bad programmer, but a decent artist. So I took it to Andy, and Andy said, oh, I can make that better. So he made it better. And we ended up with a game that was actually pretty fun.
The game played quite slow, so Gavin reprogrammed it to play a bit quicker. It was quite a good game at the time, so it was bought and published by Vaudeville for $250.
So we used this graphics toolbox that it was from this company in Michigan called Vaudeville, and they had this little license thing where you could license it for like $150.
And they said, you can definitely publish this. You had to get permission from them to publish it using their tool set, but we'd rather publish it for you, and we're national. And we were like, cool, we're 15. That's awesome. And you'll pay us? And they're like, we'll give you $250. We're like, whoa, we made it.
Rubin and Gavin then created another game called Dream Zone, which was released in 1988 and ported to the Atari ST, Amiga and personal computer. They were good and fast on creating games, so 1 year later they released a new game called Keef the Thief, which this time was published by Electronic Arts for the same systems as the previous game. They went from Vaudeville to EA with only one game released, so it was already a promising company. That year, they decided to make a fresh start, so they renamed Jam Software to the well-known Naughty Dog. With this new name, they've created their first game called Rings of Power, which was again published by Electronic Arts for the Sega Genesis.
Rings of Power was really Andy's baby.
This time it was going to be a PC game.
But as we were walking through Electronic Arts one day, Andy looked over and saw a bunch of wires coming out of a weird silver box, and he said, hey, that looks like a reverse-engineered Sega Genesis. And we were both quickly whisked by security into a room. They're like, you have to sign an NDA, you can't tell anyone that it exists, and all this other stuff. And Andy said, you know, we probably should be making Sega Genesis games. And E.A. Trapakins and Bing Gordon said, yes, you should. Sign the document, and yes, you should. So we became Genesis developers almost by accident.
In 1994, Naughty Dog produced the 3DO interactive multiplayer Way of the Warrior, which pleased to Universal Interactive Studios, so they signed with them for 3 additional games. Rubin and Gavin then created a 3-dimensional action platform game which was jokingly called Sonic Sass, cause the player was forced to constantly look at the character's rear. Well, maybe this one was a bad idea. Or maybe not.
Way of the Warrior was our last garage game. It had its problems, but it taught us a lesson, and that lesson is there's a marketplace, and the market wanted a fighting game, and it wanted it on 3DO. So when the rumored next generation systems came out, we thought there's probably a hole to fill there too.
That same year, Naughty Dog expanded its number of employees and invented a development tool called Goal-Oriented Object to create the characters and gameplay. Then they recruited cartoonist Charles Zambilas and Joe Pearson to create some characters, and one of them was the beloved Crash Bandicoot.
There was Crash, and it was amazing. and nothing really had that kind of polygon draw level. They thought, this is a hole that we need to fill. We don't have a Mario. And so they kicked out, I forgot what title, but they kicked out another title that they had and put us front and center at the corner of their booth on more monitors than any other game, right across from Mario. And suddenly, we went from working on this game that we thought we'd be the mascot to, oh my God, Sony is actually putting us up against Mario.
After 2 years of development, the game was published by Sony Computer Entertainment and shown to the public for the first time at E3, and went on to become one of the highest selling games for the PlayStation console, selling over 6.8 million copies. With all this success, Naughty Dog then proceeded to create 2 sequels for the series: Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back and Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, as well as a spin-off Crash Team Racing card game. The studio was then bought by Sony while they were focused on developing the first game of the successful Jak and Daxter series, who had a similar reception from the public as the Crash series.
No load screens in the entire game. One massive, perfectly connected world.
The Jak pitch was incredible. And you saw like just this depth of vegetation and all this life, and you're blown away because you've never seen anything like that before. And it was so powerful and moving, and it's about 15 minutes of just like, this is going to be the biggest game ever.
By the time they were creating Jak 3 and Jak X, our founders Robin and Gavin left the studio.
I hadn't had a vacation in a long time. The team got a month off at the end of every project. Projects were going from 1 year to 2 years, so that was less often. And that month, for me, getting ready for the next project and going on some sort of press tour. So I looked at it and I thought, you know, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to do this without breaking down. If this is Jason's leaving next month, it's chaos. And a lot of teams fall apart with that. If this is Jason and Andy are leaving next month and there's no preparation, whoa boy. So I went to Shuhei Yoshida, who was my boss at the time at Sony, and I said, I believe that Evan Wells can run this company.
In contrast to their previous games, in 2007 Naughty Dog made their first approach on creating a more realistic game, with the first Uncharted being praised for its technical and cinematic quality, which has sold nearly 17 million copies worldwide.
We knew that everybody was going to get a leg up in the graphics department. That wasn't going to automatically help people animate their characters better. And so we knew that we were going to have the most sophisticated animation system that's ever been written.
4 years later, Naughty Dog unveiled a new intellectual property named The Last of Us. Described as a post-apocalyptic third-person action-adventure game, the story follows Joel and a teenage girl named Ellie in a world full of humans infected with a disease named Cordyceps unilateralis. The Last of Us received an average score of 95 out of 100, indicating universal acclaim based on 98 reviews. Nothing that one of the best games ever doesn't deserve, which made Naughty Dog win the Studio of the Year.
The Last of Us was a very, very hard title to do.
And we spent months talking about different kinds of games, multiplayer versus single player, minimal narrative versus heavy narrative. And by the end, we kind of like settled this one sequence in Uncharted 2 where you get teamed up with Tenzin, this Sherpa that rescues you, and how much we were able to create a bond between these two characters through gameplay. Now we kind of asked ourselves, like, well, what if we made a whole game about building a bond between two characters?
I don't think anybody could have anticipated the reception that The Last of Us got.
You know, we're sitting there on Metacritic and refreshing all day long on the day the embargo lifts.
I mean, I was sort of in shock, and I'm thinking, wow, this is so great.
We could have made Jak and Daxter. We could have done a spin-off from Uncharted, but instead we were allowed to have this opportunity to explore something we felt really passionate about.
It's never good enough. I mean, even when the game ships, people are still saying, oh, I wish I could have done this, or I wish I could have done that.
In 2012, Naughty Dog teamed up with Mass Media to release the Jak and Daxter collection, who contains high-definition ports of the original PlayStation 2 trilogy and was released for PS3 and Vita. A few months later, Naughty Dog was releasing their first DLC ever, Left Behind, starring Ellie and Riley, a prequel to The Last of Us on which we can witness some of the background story of one of the most beloved teenagers ever. Later on, excluding HD remakes, Naughty Dog launched their first PS4 game, Uncharted 4, making this installment the first IP series to sprawl across two home console generations. Naughty Dog has a unique development philosophy, as the studio doesn't have a producer in either of their teams. The studio's lead effect artist Keith Guerrette said, quote, "It comes with a lot of pros and cons, but I think it definitely is one of our biggest strengths. Looking around at the rest of the industry, and this is something that we do talk about quite a bit, the companies that are doing really innovative, cool things are all the ones that don't have the management, like the business side, directly injected into the company. Sony's put us in this fantastic situation where we don't have any producers. We don't have any interactions with Sony corporate at all on the development. Naughty Dog has also complete freedom in basically every aspect of game design, and that also means that Sony Computer Entertainment, the parent company, doesn't prevent the studio from any implementation of game elements. Naughty Dog made some partnerships with other developers over the years, and one of them is of course Insomniac Games, and it is pretty obvious because, well, Spyro looks like a character made by Naughty Dog, since their resemblance with Crash is pretty obvious. I mean, the character design, not the physical aspects. You get it. Both companies have had a close relationship since they were working at the same building on the Universal Interactive Studios backlot. They have made similar types of games. For example, in the late 90s, Naughty Dog's Crash Bandicoot series and Insomniac's Spyro the Dragon both competed on the PlayStation as a character-heavy platforming games with imaginative environments. Both developers continued in a friendly competition after the release of the Jak and Daxter series and Ratchet & Clank games on the PlayStation 2 platform. In 2004, Vicarious Visions acknowledged the close ties between the Crash and Spyro franchises by developing the crossover games Crash Bandicoot Purple Riptos Rampage and Spyro Orange The Cortex Conspiracy. And now here we are waiting for The Last of Us Part 2, which I can't wait to put my hands on, as well as more Uncharted games or even spin-offs like The Lost Legacy.
Naughty Dog's secret has always been to hire the best people to work on the titles possible. And I know if something hasn't changed, that hasn't changed at Naughty Dog. Hire the absolute best people.
Hope you've liked this video. This is Lumos19 Studio, and we see you on the next video. Bye bye.